Welcome to Revitalize and Replant with Mark Clifton, where we equip pastors to take their churches from declining to thriving by pointing them to a new future and a new hope. Join us weekly for encouragement and practical advice in your pastoring journey.
Have you ever just all of a sudden realized in the middle of your ministry week that something is wrong with what you're doing? You know, I'm not talking about your preaching. I'm just talking about the ministry itself. Like, things are just not going the way they're supposed to. There's some struggles where are they coming from and why are they happening? This is Revitalize and Replant with Mark Clifton. I'm Dan Hurst. There's Mark sitting over there. We also have Mark Halleck with us, all the way from the home of the losing Broncos.
There you go.
And
Thanks for that
Colorado.
reminder.
But we're delighted that you have joined us today as we talk about the gifts of adversity.
You know, I think we do not prepare our people for adversity in life. Look, we live in every decade's been a challenging decade for humanity. We live in a fallen, depraved world. Violence, disease, war, terrorism, natural disasters, they're not going away. They've been around, and they'll be around until the new heaven and the new earth. And how do we prepare our people for adversity? How do we prepare our people for suffering? How do we as pastors endure suffering and adversity? And oftentimes we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to deal with it. You know, our friend Frank Lewis reminds us that when you get up to preach Sunday morning, statistically, every person you preach to in their lifetime, their life will be drastically impacted by either addiction or cancer. Someone they know, someone they love, or themselves. Every single person. People are going to suffer in this life. They're going to suffer in this world. Yeah. You get out across that congregation, look at it in the morning. If the Lord doesn't return, every one of them is going to die. They're all going to have a disease or an accident. They're all going to suffer. They're going to lose a loved one. They're going to lose a parent. You know, how do we really prepare them for suffering? What is suffering all about in the Christian context? What is adversity all about? Well, you're right, Hurst. Brian Croft helps us with this. He gives us some real insight on how adversity is actually a gift. And if you can own that in your own life as a pastor and then communicate that regularly to your congregation to prepare them when suffering comes, you know, you said, what did you say the time?
Yeah.
What did you say earlier?
Yeah. It's you don't you've got to prepare your people for suffering before the suffering comes. Help people develop, and you as well, a theology of suffering before the suffering comes. Because once the suffering comes, the adversity comes, you're in survival mode.
And, you know, again, Frank Lewis, he says, you know, talking about the storms we go through in life, he said the time to prepare for a storm is before the wind starts to blow.
Yeah.
That's a really good way of looking at it.
Yeah.
All right, so how can we do that, Mr.
Well, let's
Hurst?
just take a look at this very first one, and that is, remember, we're talking about 4 different gifts here. We're calling adversity a gift. And by the way, if it's a gift, then it means it comes from somebody.
It comes from God.
There you
From
go.
the Lord. That's right.
So adversity is a gift to remind us that we are insufficient for this work.
We're insufficient. And, you know, our mentor, I think, in this regard is the Apostle Paul. And we know this in 2 Corinthians 12, where he's talking about the thorn in the flesh, right? And he's prayed, he's asked the Lord to take it away from him, and the Lord doesn't take it away from him. And then we read, starting in verse 9, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong." This is the gospel at work. There is something about understanding and recognizing our insufficiency, our lack of power, that actually draws us to the throne of grace in such a way that we can tap into the power of Christ that is supernatural and far beyond any power we could ever have on our own.
Let me challenge you on something on that. Do you think that Paul actually meant that he delights in that, or was that just preacher talk?
I think he delights in the Lord in the midst of the pain. We don't delight in the pain. We delight in that we get to taste and see more of the Lord in the midst of pain. Does that make sense?
Well, we understand
Totally.
that there's something bigger than
There's
the
something
pain.
bigger. That's right. There's something bigger than the pain. Yeah, pain isn't fun. You know, he's not saying, man, praise God for the pain. Now he's saying the blessing of this pain, and you know it, and I know, all of us know it. It's actually been in the times of my life where I have been in the deepest, darkest places of despair that I become the most desperate for God in my life. And so this is why you can look back, and I think Paul does here, some of the sweetest moments of fellowship with the Lord I've ever had were in the midst of tears and brokenness in my life. And that is a blessing.
Yeah.
That in many ways, what does pain do? It strips us away of our idolatry, of the faith that we're putting in the things of this world to give us what only the Lord can give us. And so in that way, it is a gift from the Lord.
And also, during those times, it's not only that revelation and connection with the Lord, but God also uses those times to connect us to other brothers and sisters in the Lord that minister to us. You know, Mark, I don't think I've ever talked about this on the podcast before, but there was a time in my life I had moved up from Florida and moved up here to work with churches at risk. That's what we called them back then. And felt like that's what God wanted me to do. And I moved up here and took a job in radio and a Christian radio station, because that's what you do, you know, if you're a Christian. And took a job and got fired promptly, 60 days to the day, from a Christian broadcaster who considered himself the Christian leader of Kansas City. And he told me I didn't have what it took to be in radio. So I was fired, and I couldn't find a job anymore. McDonald's wouldn't even hire me. You know, I mean, I couldn't get a job anywhere, and it was Christmas time, and we had nothing. I mean, we had nothing. We had no income, nothing whatsoever. I mean, we had lost our house in Florida. We had a car that had blown up. I mean, it was a mess. And this was 2-3 days before Christmas. And one evening, you talk about being in despair. You know, a guy who wants to take care of his 3 boys and his wife couldn't even pay his rent. And about 2-3 days before Christmas, it was 2 days before Christmas, so there was a knock on the door in the evening. And I went to the door and opened it up. It was Clifton. And Clifton was there, and he had sacks, paper bags full of stuff. You know, I mean, and it was like a miracle. You know, we had, you know, and you talk about Christmas. I didn't know that toilet paper was a Christmas. It was awesome. We had toilet paper.
That's
and we
so
had
awesome.
toothpaste, and we had canned goods, and you know. But you see, God used that moment of adversity to teach me that He cared.
Yeah,
know? That's
so good.
So this idea that adversity is a gift to remind us that we're insufficient. We can't do it. I couldn't help myself during that time. God was the provider, and He uses His people to provide.
And I always think of Moses in this case. You know, Moses was resistant of following God's leadership, even after he was at the bush that was, the fire was in the bush. The bush wasn't on fire, but he's looking at this bush, and he hears the voice of God, and God tells him who He is. He has this, and then God says, "I want you to go." And Moses, don't think I'm interested. But finally, God convinces him, and so he goes, and he pleads with Pharaoh. And what happens? Pharaoh says, "You're crazy." Basically, no. And by the way, now your work's going to get harder. And again, had Moses shown up that first time, and God changed Pharaoh's heart eventually. God could have changed Pharaoh's heart in the first conversation, right?
Yep.
But if he had of, I think in many ways Moses would have felt like, well, I'm pretty good at this, and the people would have thought Moses is he's a great leader, and look, and maybe Pharaoh wasn't that bad. We should have asked him a long time ago. But because God made it so difficult for them, and they had to go through all of the plagues and everything, it showed them their insufficient for the work and how only God could do this. It's not a bad place in ministry, just like you were in your life at that time, to be in a place where I can't do anything else.
Right.
That's right.
And you look back on it and you go, that was one of the best times I've ever had.
Absolutely.
Is a place where I knew I couldn't do anything else. And you talk to pastors who maybe have had what we would call some success in ministry. They will tell you about a moment when they came to the end.
Yeah.
And they said, I was broken. I couldn't do this anymore. And then I realized it wasn't me, it was Him.
Yeah.
That's so good.
Which brings us to the second gift of adversity, and that is that adversity is a gift to manifest the life of Jesus through His servants. Man, this is rich. In other words, when you are going through adversity, you are manifesting the life of Jesus. Yikes.
I think Spurgeon, and we're in the Spurgeon Library.
Yeah.
And here at Midwestern, and I know Spurgeon, who had a lot of problems with physical ailments and died at a relatively young age. Some people have said, they look at me and they know what Spurgeon would look like if he lived 10 more years. But Spurgeon would say, I would that my infirmities would become a platform on which to display the grace of God. And that's the way Piper said, I don't want to waste my cancer.
Yeah, right.
The same kind of thing.
Yeah.
And in dealing with, in church revitalization, guys, we deal with a lot of older adults. A lot of older adults. Sometimes only older adults. And when you get older as an adult, as a Christian, kind of one or two things happen. You either get sweeter or you get grumpier. You don't normally stay the same. And you may be an older Christian listening to this, or you may have older Christians in your church listening to this, and life is tough for them. I mean, they've lost their spouse. They may have lost their home. They can't live in their home anymore. They're in a care center. They can't drive anymore. Maybe their eyesight's going bad. They can't play the sports they used to play. They can't hunt the way they used to hunt. There's very little they can do. They have a lot of health problems. And so they may say to their grandchildren, y'all need to be in church. And they may say to your kids, you need to get those kids in church. But if, as a grandparent, a great-grandparent, if you just complain and moan and feel sorry for yourself, I know it's hard times. But what if you told those great-grandchildren, honey, I miss your grandma. We were together 60 years. I miss my farm. I miss my truck. I miss hunting. And I can't even see very well, and I can't hear very well. But I tell you what, I've got Jesus, and that's all I need.
Wow, amen.
They're gonna know that what Granddad had, I need. Right? That's using your suffering to manifest the life of Jesus in you. You're going to suffer in this life no matter what.
Yeah.
And again, Piper said, don't waste that cancer.
Yeah.
Spurgeon said, use it as a platform to display God's glory. And I would say, use it as a chance to communicate to the next generation. I've been through all of this, and at the end of it, I can tell you, all I really need is Jesus.
Wow.
He's enough.
Yeah,
Well, your
so good.
suffering becomes your ministry. I mean, it really does.
Yeah, that's true.
Which brings us to the third point, and that is that adversity is a gift to bring life to your congregation. Let's talk about how does adversity bring your congregation to life?
Wow. Well, I mean, man, that's a great question. And I think about, we learn together. This is the beauty of the local church. And I think not just as pastors, but as a community, we learn how to suffer by journeying with other sufferers. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There was a book years ago called The Wounded Healer. And I love the title. I don't know if the book's any good, but I love the title. And the reality is it's in our woundedness many times and out of our woundedness that we minister to one another and see the Lord bring healing to other people. And so I think, Pastor, what I would say personally is your pain, you've heard it say, don't waste your pain. And I think part of how you bring life and hope to your congregation and help them grow is as we are vulnerable and honest about our own sufferings and our own pain, our own dependence on the Lord, our own brokenness in the midst of all that. And I just think of pastors, again, who when you go through hardship, how are you inviting your congregation to journey with you in that? Boy, I sure hope we are leading churches where we suffer well together.
Wow.
And I think that's a gift. That's a gift that sadly in many churches you actually don't see for a variety of reasons.
And one of the ways suffering and adversity is a gift to bring life to your congregation is that if you prepare them for it, you teach them a theology of suffering, that it is many times through suffering that we would, Paul said, I want you to know, I want you to know the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his suffering. It is through the fellowship of suffering that we begin to understand just a portion of what our sin caused our Lord to suffer, right?
Yeah,
just a portion. Right. So we fellowship in that suffering by realizing that. But in fellowship of suffering as a body, it also helps our people understand that our suffering always has a purpose.
Yeah.
And it's never without a reason. We may not know that reason between here and glory, but one day Paul said, I will know all things, and all things work together for good. So we know that all things work together for good.
Yeah.
And so we know that we're going to know that. And so in the life of a church, when you teach a proper theology of suffering week in, week out, month in, month out, that's a gift to bring life to your church because suffering will come.
Yeah.
And when it comes, they don't freak out.
That's right.
They don't run.
Yep.
They don't go, what in the world's going on? Look, if you'd go to a Word of Faith church, right? And you're not supposed to get sick, and you're not supposed to have any debt, and you're supposed to always be happy, and suffering comes, you got some real problems.
That's right. Yep.
But if you go to a biblically sound church that teaches a proper theology of suffering, your people feel like, okay, I don't want to face these things, but it brings life to your congregation because they know I can face anything.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Together, we can face anything as the body of Christ because suffering is what we do together. It's what Christ did, and he never It also teaches them that Jesus runs to them in their suffering. He doesn't abandon them. He comes to them, and his grace is more than sufficient, for whatever they need. It's more than you could ever drink in.
Yeah.
And as Corrie ten Boom said, there's no pit so deep that God's love's not deeper still. Yeah. And in suffering, our church needs to they get to experience the love of God in a way they couldn't. And while they don't want it and they don't seek it, they don't freak out when it comes.
Yeah.
And when it does come, they know how to deal with it. Yep. That's how it brings life to your congregation.
Yeah, this is the grace I want to learn in my own life. I have an elderly lady in my church who is in a lot of pain. She's up in years, and she's just gone through a lot, and she has a lot of physical issues and is in a lot of pain. And I saw her one Sunday, and I just told her, I said, man, I just hurt for you. I hurt to see you suffering like this. I'm praying for you. I'm praying that God will give you grace and comfort. She said, don't. And she stopped me, and she says, I don't want you to see my suffering. I want you to see my Jesus.
Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
That's the maturity.
And how that brings joy.
Yeah, that's right.
Even now, her suffering, God's using to bring joy.
No, that's exactly right.
But lastly, adversity is a gift. Oh, this is so good. To prepare us all for eternity.
Yeah.
Heaven is going to be a place without suffering. And it's going to seem even greater because we're suffering here. Mm-hmm. And one day we'll go to a place where there's not going to be any more cancer or any more violence or any more suffering, any more tears, any more loss. That place is a certainty.
That's right.
And so it's a wonderful opportunity for us to say yes. And basically, when people say, how do we get through these days? You get through these days with the hope of certain future glory.
That's exactly right.
I realize every week more and more and more that everything that we do in ministry, it has to have eternal value.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to do anything in my ministry that doesn't have eternal value. And you know what? Adversity has eternal value.
Yeah.
That's right.
And so I have to embrace that. I have to accept that.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And again, just knowing that it just prepares our heart for heaven. And I think that's one of the reasons older Christians often love to sing about heaven and think about heaven because they're close to it, for one thing.
Yeah.
But I think also they've had enough suffering in this life.
Yeah.
And I do remember the last thing I ever heard my dad say, he was in a hospital. He eventually went home, and he stayed with my sister until he passed away, but he was not coherent. The last thing I heard him say in the hospital was, he had a lot of health problems. He had congestive heart failure. He was way up in his 80s, and my mom had already gone on to be with the Lord, and he was living with us kids. And so the doctors were coming in and said, well, it looks like your kidneys are having some issues and your other things are having some issues. We need to run some other tests if you want to do that. And he was so weak and so tired and had congestive heart failure. And I'll never forget, he said, you know what, let's not do that. Yeah. He said, heaven's a pretty great place, and I'm ready to go. And a few days later, he slipped off and went to heaven.
Wow.
I just think, the suffering we live in kind of says, you know what, I think I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
And it prepares us for eternity.
It matures us, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
It really does. All right.
Well, you've been listening to these Gifts of Adversity from Brian Croft, and of course there will be notes there that give you more indication about how you can study more from Brian's writings. And we're thankful for him for sharing that with us. But it is something that we need for our own ministries to understand that it's not all going to be peaches and cream. We've got to suffer for the cause of Christ. And God uses that for His honor and for His glory. Thank you for spending time with us today. We're here every Tuesday and Thursday, and sometimes on Friday.
And sometimes on Friday. Every other Friday, whatever other Friday means.
That's usually a special edition where we talk to somebody. We talk to somebody special.
Somebody special, besides just the three of us.
Yeah, and so we hope you'll join us. Thanks for tuning in. I hope that you'll help us spread the word about the podcast. You have friends, you have pastoral friends who need this. It's interesting. In my church, a lot of my people listen to the podcast.
Do they really?
Yeah, I can't lie. I can't lie on the podcast. I can't make up stories.
Can't tell stories about them because they
I have to be careful.
You out.
Yeah.
All right.
So anyway, thanks so much for listening. You've been listening to Revitalize and Replant with Mark Clifton, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us today on Revitalize and Replant. This podcast is brought to you by the North American Mission Board, where we help dying or struggling churches regain health for the glory of God and the good of their communities. If you found this conversation helpful, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform. To learn more about becoming a replanting pastor or to explore resources about revitalization for your own church, visit churchreplanters.com.